Good afternoon, colleagues. Our panel this afternoon will be looking at the issue of how women can boost research. And we have indeed 3 panelists. We are missing one, but I think we are ready to cover the other panelists if they do not turn up. So I want to first introduce our theme. So participation of women in science and research remains low, despite the potential benefits of gender diversity in enhancing the quantity and quality of research. Despite the increasing number of women joining research careers, women remain underrepresented in research training institutions, especially at leadership levels, acquisition of research funding, implementation and research communication, including peer-reviewed publications and conference proceedings. This session, therefore, explores gender equity and engagement of women in research, the utility of engaging women in research, the barriers and opportunities for enhancing engagement of women in research, including training and mentorship. The session also explores evidence and intervention gaps in understanding and addressing of barriers of women engagement in global health research. Discussing this topic this afternoon are 3 distinguished women, and let me introduce them. Firstly, let me introduce Professor Rhoda Wanyeze, who is a professor of disease control and dean at Makerere University School of Public Health. She has vast experience in public health research, capacity building, and program management, especially in HIV, TB, and maternal health. Professor Rhoda was previously the program manager for the Makerere University Joint AIDS Program and served as a clinician. Her work has been funded by NIH, CDC, Global Fund, among others. She has developed and sustained several research and service collaborations. Please help me to welcome Professor Rhoda Wanyeze, and please raise your hand so people recognize you. Someone who has lived the experience of research. And also it is, I think for me, an honor to introduce another distinguished woman, Professor Pat Garcia. Professor Garcia is a professor at the School of Public Health at Cayetano Heredia University in Peru, and member of the US National Academy of Medicine. She's a former Minister of Health of Peru and former chief of the Peruvian National Institute of Health. She's actively involved in research and training in global health, reproductive health, STI, HIV, HPV, and medical informatics. Please give her a round of applause. Former Minister of Health. Isn't it a privilege to share the podium with a former minister? Thank you. And then finally, let me recognize and introduce Professor Sud Suleiman, and she's a professor of parasitology with special training skills in scientific research methodology. She held the post of Assistant Dean for Academic Affairs, Nile College, academic research professor and advisor on health issues and coordination, Ministry of Science and Technology. She's also a researcher, professor, and director of Tropical Medicine Research Institute, National Center for Research in Khartoum, Behaziya Research Unit, National Health Laboratories, and is a freelance health and environment advisor. She is currently a member of the Executive Committee, Sudanese National Academy of Sciences, member of Technical Advisor and Ethics Research Committee, Federal Ministry of Health, member of Sudanese Environmental Conservation Society, and is also as research director at Sudan Medical Heritage Foundation. Please give her a round of applause. As mentioned earlier on, our fourth panelist is not here, but the three distinguished ladies are ready to tackle the element that may miss this afternoon. Thank you. Okay, so the panelists will be addressing 4 issues. Why does it matter? Because the theme, remember, is about how women can boost research. Is it important? They will also give you an overview of what they think is already taking place, where we are. They will look at barriers and opportunities. They will also share some experiences on what has already worked or what works. And of course, they'll give some information about evidence gaps that exist. So let me start with Professor Garcia. Pat, I want you to share with the audience your experiences, and particularly looking at barriers, opportunities, and of course, any funding issues, and I do know you have a lot of experience, and finally, of course, issue of communicating research. But I do know that I'm starting in the middle, and it's deliberately because I want you to start sharing your experiences first, because I think many in the audience would like to hear you. What has been your journey? And then we'll go to the other panelists. Thank you. And she has, I think, 10 minutes, because we have now, I think, managed to squeeze time for the 3 of you. So 10 minutes is enough, but I'll be very strict. 10 minutes, and then we'll hand over to the other panelists. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. First of all, I want to thank you, the organizers, for the opportunity of being here. I think it was time to have this type of meeting in Africa, in our regions in the South, because we really need to be part of this movement of women leaders in global health. So I have to start by telling you a little bit of my own story. So I never thought about public health in my life. I mean, I wanted to be a good doctor. I always knew that I wanted to be a good doctor, especially because when I was very little, I got very sick. Apparently, doctors thought that I was having leukemia, and I ended being in the hospital for more than a year, and, but it ended up being an infectious disease. It was brucellosis, with a presentation with hematological signs that looked like a leukemia. So I said, I want to be a doctor. And I studied medicine in Peru. And for those things that we never planned, somehow I ended up applying to the US, and I trained at the University of Washington, where I saw the light, and saw that when you are a physician, you can solve problems one at a time, but when you work in public health, one thing that you do can really change lives of thousands of people. And when we're working in global health, we're multiplying that, because we have the opportunity of collaborate at doing things. And I learned also about research. I have a great mentor, Dr. Kim Holmes, and I learned that there are so many questions that we have around the world that it's great to try to answer them with data, and research helps for that. So one of the important things is that, I mean, when I went to the States, I always wanted to go back to my country, because I wanted to do something there. And my mentor helped me on my return, giving me the best advice. When you go back, you need to go back with funding, with grants. And actually, he helped me writing grants. I wrote 3 grants. I was so lucky that I got the funding for the 3 grants. And so that funding allowed me a smooth return from the US to Peru and start my work in research in Peru. But I have to tell you that one of the most important things and the shocking things is that going back to Peru, although my university was really, I mean, there was a lot of respect for research, there were no women researchers, so it was difficult to find a role model. So actually, my role models were those that I met in the US, like my mentor, who was a man, but also my collaborators from the University of Washington that were men and women. And from the time that I returned, I funded myself through my grants, international grants, because in my country, until 4 years ago, there was no funding at all for research. Now we have a little bit of funding thanks to an agreement between the National Council of Science and Technology in Peru and Grand Challenges Canada. But at the time there wasn't. And it has been already 24 years working in my country, in Peru, in research, working in grants. And one of the things that I had been trying to do is to create an enabling environment for others, for other people, for other youth to work in research and to feel that they can do something and can make the difference. And especially to try to really convince and really enlighten women to go into research. So I have seen that it's so important to have role models, and that because the best legacy that we can have, I think, are number one, if you decide to have kids, that's a legacy, but a very important legacy that we have in academia are our students and those researchers that will come on.
I was expecting a better clap. I think this is inspiring. This is a lived experience. This is not something you read in a book. Someone went to study in the US and she had been unwell when she was younger. Those experiences make a difference in what you do in life. And I think I also like what you said about research that will make an impact, that will make a difference. Because sometimes we do research that does not necessarily make a difference in people's lives. I think the issue of role models, very important, and creating an environment that would enhance others to do research. So I'm very happy with the way you've started, and I think we'll have a very good conversation, but maybe for the time being, let's go to Rhoda. Rhoda needs to share with the audience why it matters, that we should be concerned about research, and then of course, where are we? And I think colleagues, particularly from our region, would be interested to know where are we as Africans, but also other regions. Each region, each country should be concerned about the status quo, because it's that what makes us uncomfortable that will push us forward to move in the area of research among women. So Rhoda, it's your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Adres, and thank you to the organizers for the opportunity to be part of this discussion. Before I get to the gender issues, I'd like to note that we still have a lot of inequity in research capacity as well as research outputs. And this is across a number of differences that we might have. Geographically, for example, we know that Africa, where we are today, hosts 13% of the global population. And we have a lot of challenges, social, economic, and health. But Africa still contributes less than 1% of the global research output. So we have lots of inequity. Even within Africa, predominantly about 10 countries produce most of the research outputs for Africa. So even before we get into the gender, because sometimes we are comparing the men and women, and it may appear that the men are so much better than we are, but if you're located in a region with so much inequity, you might be ahead, but you're still not there yet. So I think that it's really important for us to look at the inequities also in a broader sense, whether it's geographical, whether it's race or other differences that we might have in addition to gender. But that said, generally, there are a lot of inequities in terms of access to training, as well as access to mentorship, and a lot of other individual, institutional, and policy, global policy issues that make it difficult for women to be able to make a significant contribution to research. Over the years, the past 5 years to 10 years, we have had a dramatic increase in terms of the number of women taking higher education, degree level as well as master's level overall, but also in the science subjects, including medicine and other health-related disciplines. A report from UNESCO, for example, shows that about 53% of graduates at bachelor's and master's level are women, and at PhD level, about 43% are women. But this varies a lot. Yes, we need to appreciate that. This varies a lot across the regions, and especially at PhD and postdoc levels, and supports for individuals to be able to grow into independent researchers. In Africa, PhD level training is still quite limited, and especially within the biomedical sciences. Looking at some recent analysis that was done in 2017, although the response rate was not so good, it shows about 30% for the biomedical sciences compared to the other health disciplines in terms of access by women. So generally, we have had some improvements. One of the challenges with PhD training, especially for the women, is the need sometimes to go elsewhere for so long, especially because we still have limited capacity for PhD training in certain areas like the biomedical sciences. So you get a scholarship and it's exciting, but that takes you about 3 years in the US, for example, or elsewhere, away from your family, away from all the other networks that you have. And I have interfaced with women that have actually decided that they will not take the PhDs because they are taking them away from their families. So it's a big sacrifice for them. Others have attempted to go with their families, and when they go with their families and they get settled, then relocating back becomes a challenge. So if we are going to expand opportunities for women, we need to think through investing in improving the capacities so that we can do more PhD and postdoc training and support locally within Africa, or have more flexible sandwich models that will allow women to find time to spend with their families. That's a challenge that I faced myself when I was making a choice on where to do my PhD. I had to sacrifice one where I needed to stay away for 3 years over one that would give me a bit of flexibility so that I can have the PhD but also be able to keep support for my family. So that's a challenge. But despite the improvements in the number of women that are accessing higher education in health sciences, we note that the actual participation of women in research, women that are choosing to have a career in research, is much lower. Looking at statistics again, it shows about 28% of researchers employed within research and development within academia and research institutions is about 28%. So only 28% of individuals out there employed in research are actually, the researchers are actually women. And this is, again, quite varied across the regions, with some going as low as 19% in the South and Western Asia, and about 30% in Africa. So we still have some ground to cover in terms of ensuring that women are equally represented as researchers. Again, reports show that even when women are participating as researchers, they tend to be predominantly, in the lower ranks. In academia, we've seen that most of the women assistant lecturers and lecturers, or assistant professors and associate professors, depending on the nomenclature. So we are not getting women going higher in the ranks as much as we ought to see within the research environment. Again, looking at leadership within universities, the latest report from WHO of 2018 showed 28% of deans of the 25 top global universities, deans of public health and medicine, only 28% were female. And we see this in various regions as well. And also looking at the reports again, among the top universities, 30% of the directors of global health programs are women. So again, it's predominantly men that are leading the global health programs, as well as many of the especially big multi-country research projects. And that also goes for independent research institutions. We see this predominantly led by men, especially in the South. Access to funding is a challenge for women. We've had the experience of a party here. She managed to get her first 3 grants funded. That's not a common story, perhaps because she had very good mentorship. Several women struggle to access funding, and even when they do, they tend to start off with smaller grants, and then the long-term growth and being able to access larger grants then becomes a challenge, and many tend to drop off. I've also looked at statistics for major funding agencies and noticed that the men tend to get the bigger grants. The bigger multi-country grants tend to go to the men. So we still have issues in terms of accessing funding, and the drop-off for women is really high. Looking at research productivity and outputs, again, whether it's publications or participation in conferences, whether as organizers, panel discussions, keynote speakers, again, it's been predominantly men, although it's increased over the past several years with a lot of scrutiny and a lot of advocacy. One of the issues I noted when I was looking at the data across funding agencies and institutions was a major lack of data, gender disaggregated data, in who is getting scholarships and faculty development, who is getting the funding, although increasingly several funding agencies have started documenting this. But there are a lot of opportunities, and I would like to highlight this. I was pleasantly impressed actually to see, especially the NIH website and the number of policies and documents that have come out over the past several years, and reading around the structures we had yesterday from the panel firsthand, there's a lot of improvements. I've also seen a lot of improvements in other funding agencies, including the UK Research and Innovations, with very detailed policies, including a checklist for researchers in composition of research teams to ensure gender equity and all other aspects of the research. The same goes for the IDRC and other Canadian funding agencies. So we see a lot of changes. We also see a lot of pronouncements from the UN as well as regional entities, including the African Union, about supporting research, especially also with statements on women. A lot of networks are growing to support women in research, and we have seen funding streams, for example, the WHO TDR for women in Africa, among others. So there are increasing opportunities that we need to harness. What we don't see much is shifts in policies, especially in academic institutions. The structures and the policies are not changing as fast. I've seen a few with good practices, like Muhimbili University in Tanzania, where the policy explicitly states that 50% of leadership in the university will be women. I've seen also a few with about 30%, but I've not seen a lot of those actual targets that we are working towards in terms of improving participation of women. In summary, I would like to say that despite the challenges that we still need to work at to strengthen the policies, I think we have a lot of opportunities, and we need to quickly mobilize and harness these opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think you have raised critical issues, and I think we can have a conversation with the audience later on equalities, issues of training, education, funding, and of course leadership in our universities and outputs. Let me now move on to Professor Saud Suleiman. She will be addressing the issue of what has worked. So I think the two speakers have already talked through some of the issues, but I want Yeah, so we'll get to the next speaker, and then we'll come back to Prof. Pat. She has some other issues that she wants to add to her presentation. Thank you. So maybe let's try to stick to the 10 minutes so that we can have also time with the audience. Thank you.
Thank you very much. How did I come here this year? Last year I was in London, and there was a session on partnerships and funding that was held at the London School of Hygiene for the second meeting of this global women in global health. And I was there attending speakers talking about partnerships, funding, and so on. And Agnes was chair of the session. So I commented, really, I was very desperate, and I told her that we in Sudan, we run through a very hard time, as we had been sanctioned for a long time. We don't have funding for research, and we have lots of tropical diseases that need to be addressed through international funding. So she commented saying that, be patient, things will change. And she quoted an example that in Rwanda, things had changed so much that now they are leading in many things in Africa. So I was very lucky, and Sudan was very lucky, and her comment came to be truthful. In December 2018, we had demonstrations in Sudan against the rule of the military and the Islamic government, and the rule was thrown out after 30 years of power in the Sudan. And we have a new democratic government now by June 2018. And in that government, we have a very thoughtful and leader as a prime minister. He used to work for the African Unity, and he's now prime minister of the government, and he's insisting that he wants to see 40% of women in his government in the chemistry. Great. So now we have ladies as foreign minister, our Minister for Foreign Affairs, our Minister of Higher Education, Minister of Youth, and Minister of Social Affairs. And in addition, we have vice chancellors, females, and we have deans, we have heads of departments, and we are really moving forward for the 40% in the government. Sudan is one of those African countries where in most of the academic institutions, the number of females studying is more than 60, sometimes 65, 70%, more than males. We have a large number of graduates. They are, large numbers across the board in many of the faculties. And because there is a lot of migration to the Arab world and brain drain, a lot of academicians and doctors and lecturers and so on, they left the country to other countries so that they can get a better salary. And most of the females, usually they do not go unless they are, with their husbands, or they are left behind and they are taking jobs in the ministries and so on. So now we have lots of the females in higher posts, and we really hope that we are really coming to this 40% across the board in all the posts. I'll tell you about my experience. I started off as a fresh graduate from School of Science as a biologist, zoology and chemistry, and I joined the Department of Schistosomiasis Control. I was the first female to be employed in that lab, in fact, and thank you. Thank you very much. And I was given the responsibility of starting an aquarium lab. So I was breeding snails all over, and I had other assistants with me, and they used to call us the girls' lab. So I had many females in there, and we were all working for our postgraduate degrees, and I was the first to get a scholarship to go to the London School of Hygiene for a master's degree, and then got back home and worked on my PhD on schistosomiasis as well. And since then, I was sort of, a female researcher looking and trying very hard to support other females to become researchers. So I was teaching, lecturing, and mentoring, and supervising, and helping females to become scientists, researchers. I was employed in the Ministry of Health, so I didn't have only science graduates. I had graduates from pharmacy, from medicine, other fields, public health, and so on. And we really worked very hard towards having a bigger group of females working on diseases from the environment, which are very widespread in Sudan. We have all the neglected diseases almost. And our main task was on waterborne diseases. We have lots of rivers, waters, and so on. We have waterborne diseases as of high prevalence in many of the states. So we started out going out to the communities, working on control of schistosome education, and well, earlier in the 70s and 80s, schistosomiasis was sort of controlled by managing the water system, and then treatment, which was coming up as praziquantel, was coming up as a new drug for schistosomiasis. So we were doing mass chemotherapy and then doing environmental changes so as to reduce on the extent of the transmission of bilharzia, schistosomiasis. And then I became a health and environment scientist. But the past 30 years were so hard on us. The government, the military government, we had sanctions for about 20 years, and we didn't get any big grants. We didn't get any support. We didn't get a lot of scholarships. We didn't get the chance to go out, to travel, to participate in conferences, and so on. And many of us, well, those who opted to leave the country, they still worked outside, but they came back, for short terms and left. But those who opted to stay, they were staying and determined to build a good country. Until this new government came, we started having, the best scientists now coming from outside and trying to help us in building the new government, in building the new country that we are looking for. So what did I do with my students? Mostly were females, but I didn't separate them from the males. I had more females, but I didn't separate them from the boys. They used to come to me for advice. So I taught scientific research and proposal writing, and I had lots of courses. And most of those were sort of teamed as groups. So in each course, we had a group that are linked, and they are working together in multidisciplinary research projects. So, and I invited most of them, the young ones, to come and discuss their research and prepare it and present it in front of their colleagues, so that they would have the talent of presenting their results and the research in front of others, and encourage them to present the proposals and discuss with their colleagues and with me. And I looked for funding for them. Recently, also during the past 5 years, I had a reasonable grant from WHO to teach implementation research. And that was the thing that I really liked, because implementation research is going to communities and working with communities on how to implement a research study that would be among those who are affected in communities. I had a big group with me, or at least I did about 5-6 courses, and now I have about a community of about 250 researchers who are working on implementation research with me in different groups, in different projects. I like multidisciplinary projects, so there is a new center. Okay, there is a new center which will be established in one of the universities, University of Bahri, and it is going to be on One Health. And so they will be giving degrees on One Health, veterinary, agriculture, medicine, public health, whatever it is. And we are looking for funding for that center to come up so that we can all share with our experiences and teach the young ones how to do multidisciplinary implementation research. I thank you for that.
What a story. I think she deserves another round of applause, a loud one.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, thank you. So I think I want to give the audience an opportunity to have a conversation with us, and then I'll get back to Prof. but Pat Garcia, because she needed to respond to 2 other issues, but she will do that after the audience has given us perhaps their own input, any suggestions. Try to keep your issues straight to the point and so that we can have as many people speak in the next 10 minutes. Thank you. So I've seen so many hands. I'll start with 2 hands on my right. So I think it's 3rd row and is it 6th row, 2. Then we'll come to the middle here and get 2 people to speak. And then finally, we get 1 hand on the left-hand side. So quickly, to the point, and we'll continue with the conversation. Thank you.
Test, all right. Woo. Okay, so first of all, I wanted to say thank you all for sharing your experiences. We're talking about women in research and how do we move this forward. I'd really like to hear pragmatic solutions. How do we actually move this? How do we do it? How does it happen? I know Dr. Valentine yesterday was talking about NIH and what NIH has done, and I think there was reference to the website that actually demonstrates that these things are moving forward. How do we move from just NIH and what NIH has done? How do we take that success to the other funding agencies? How do we take that to the donor space to make sure that this thing becomes a reality? Because I think now we are very clear that there is a paucity of female representation and research driving the agenda, making it move forward. I'm more interested now in what is the next step and what is the call to action from this point. Thank you.
Thank you. Next. Yep.
Thank you very much. I'm a researcher in Uganda. I work with children with special needs and disability and young mothers of HIV, who are HIV positive. Now my question is, you talked about creating an enabling environment. And when we are in the field trying to talk to these young mothers, when we are creating a first conversation, they tend to pull out. They don't trust us. They don't want to open up to us because they think since everyone in society is judging them, perhaps we are also going to judge them. So how best can we create an enabling environment? Do we first make them our friends? How do we do that? Do we go to provide some of the things that their children with special needs need? How best do we do that? Thank you.
Thank you. The middle. Okay. Yes, please.
Thank you. I'm an epidemiologist here in Rwanda, and my question is, we talked about the funding, the NIH, the WHO now, but how do we make sure, because those fundings have a checklist, and you need to meet those criteria to be able to actually get those funds, and I think that's really what is the barrier for women, because we can't really meet those checklists due to the background, the education. So how do we make sure that women can actually fit the checklist, but also that checklist can actually fit the women that we have? Thank you.
Thank you. Interesting question. I want to take a hand at the back. I think a lady, yeah.
Thank you for a wonderful panel. My name is Jackie. I'm a PhD student at Strathmore University in Kenya. I also just want to reflect on what the lady has just said about the checklists. I want to ask, for the fellowships that are being given and advertised, why are there always age limits, like under 40, and maybe you're doing your PhD and you're in your mid-40s, and that's when you've gotten the opportunity because you're having kids and living life. Including this conference, there was a limit of 40, and then they opened it up mysteriously, and some of us got in. Then, I even had Agnes say herself that she did her PhD in her 50s, which is most people now. So I want to ask why those limits keep on being put, the age limits on fellowships, on postdocs, on entry into PhDs, on all opportunities. Then secondly, there's the issue of transparency on the funding. Nobody gets to know who gets funded in the end, you know? It's always well-funded institutions that have many sources of funding. When you're a small community-based organization or a starting researcher, you don't get to know. You know, you don't get access to any funding from anywhere. You apply, they don't even respond and say, we're sorry. Even the national research institutions, I was in a panel, I asked them, they said, oh, our email system doesn't work. We'll get back to you somehow. So nobody gives people feedback on who gets funded, who doesn't get funded. And then the third thing that the lady talked about, the actions that can be taken, what can be done to deal with the old boys network where selection into trainings has no criteria? Somebody's supposed to be your mentor, but they're not sure whether they want you at a training. You're a little bit threatening, you're moving too fast, you published without their permission, you know, because when you send them your paper, it stays in their inbox for a year, and so you're like, well, I guess I can write without you. So such things happen to women, and there's no recourse within the university system. Lastly, there's the issue of voice. Sometimes when you write as a woman from sub-Saharan Africa, somehow the journals keep on saying your English is, you need to take your work for editing elsewhere, which you cannot afford.
Thank you very much. I think we have taken the question.
I'm finishing.
Yes, I know you're finishing.
I'm
but
done.
I think that the issue has been picked.
Okay.
I'm just being reminded that we're running short on time, but the issues you've raised are clear. The issue of voice, thank you. So perhaps let's just give this lady, of course, a chance to ask the last question, and then Pat to respond to most of these issues, because these were the very issues she was going to talk about. So I'll ask her first to respond, and then the other two panelists will make their comments. So please, last question, and thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Samira from Burkina Faso, but currently working in Montreal, in Canada, and aiming to return to do research in Burkina Faso, where I think I have more I will have more impact. And thank you for encouraging me on this way. So I want to compliment on her question, because it's literally the same question I had. And I want to compliment in asking, how do we overcome fear? Because when you ask, you will have fear for women senior researchers to include or to give a place to other young women researchers. How do we overcome this? And by asking them to, maybe for application for grants and things like that, give the floor to young women researchers who are doing all their great job, because they just literally collect the result and just put their name at the first or last place. And also even men mentor and men leader. How do we overcome this fear in order to include more female young researchers in the field? Oh, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. So may I say something? Okay, well, thank you so much for all those questions. I have to tell you that, that's what I started by telling you a little bit of my story. So I have been working on research for a long time, okay? And I have lived what you are saying. A grant or a paper that has been edited by my mentor, who is a English native speaker, but because my name was part of the grant, the reviewers' comments were like, find somebody to improve your English. And I was surprising, okay? So those things happen. But I want to try to use this time to talk about the action, okay? So what can we think about? Because, we in the South, and I'm talking about Latin America and Africa, you know, we have more things in common than you can imagine. Yes, we have to deal with funding, with international funding, because that's the one that it is. But I think we will need eventually to start working also, trying to push for our governments also to invest in our needs for research. So it's not only asking for money, okay, and we have to do that. And that's what I mentioned, and I comment that right now in Peru, for example, we catalyze this work together between Grand Challenges Canada and our government to have funding that is half and a half. And now we have a new agreement with the Fogarty. So when a researcher in Peru gets funding, from Fogarty or from the NIH, the government will pay for a PhD, a Peruvian PhD, to be part of that research, okay? And this is something that I think it's going to be a very interesting model. So this is one of the issues that I think as countries and as researchers, we need to raise our voice. So our governments have to start taking also responsibility in that sense. And I want to talk a little bit about the barriers, to talk about the opportunities and the things that we can do. And let me tell you that, I mean, as my own experience, and this is a very recent experience, you know, I became Minister of Health in 2016, and I have to leave all my grants and all the research that I was doing, so that I had no conflict of interest. But then, when I finished my period of Minister of Health, I lasted 1 year and 2 months, and I doubled the average time of a Minister of Health in Peru, okay? So I had to start writing grants again, okay, because I needed funding. And I started writing grants alone and with my collaborators. And what happened is that after having written a lot, I remember we started to receive the first notices about some of the grants, and I was sitting having lunch with one of my friends from the University of Washington, Dr. Joe Sant. I don't know if you know him, but he was one of my collaborators, and we were reviewing what happened. So from the 4 grants that we wrote, in 2 of them, I was the lead PI, and in 2 of the others, he was the lead PI. So the ones in which I was the lead PI, I was told that they were not going to be even reviewed. And the ones that he was the lead PI, they were reviewed and they were considered fundable, okay? And so we were kind of like talking about it, and he was laughing, oh, you know, and I think you're smart, and he was saying, I said, like, well, something is going on. So at the same time, we heard about a study that the Bill and Melinda Gates did about grant funding. And this was quite interesting because what they found, and these specific grants were reviewed in an anonymous way, okay? So, and they found that women received far fewer grants and that there was a significant difference in specific words used by males compared to females that were also associated with increased success of obtaining grants, and that females that eventually received grants had equal or much greater outcomes of the funding. So they call this report, is blinded review enough? How gendered outcomes arise even under anonymous evaluation. So since we saw this, we decided to write an email to Roger Glass at NIH because he's a great person. And actually, we acknowledge that the Fogarty is doing lots of things to try to lead in the change for equity in so many dimensions. But we shared with him the report, and we shared with him also this anecdote of these 2 funding and 2 not funding. Although I didn't get the funding, I got an answer from Roger that was very interesting, and he told me, well, yeah, we're very concerned about this because we just did a study in which we had this abstract that we sent to reviewers, but what we did is we put the name of the PI, of the lead PI. It was, for some of them, was a woman or a man, and the last name was an American or an Asian or a Latin, etc. And whom do you think that got the greatest scores? Yeah, the ones that were men and American. And he told me that they were going even further on the studies, and they were trying to review what has happened historically with all the funding. So, and this leads me to all the barriers that we still have. And I think we can classify the barriers on 2 big groups, okay? The ones that are extrinsic and the ones that are internal. These extrinsic barriers had to do with social issues, with institutions, okay? And one of the things, and this has to do with funders, and this is a plea for funders, there are some that are doing much better, Grand Challenges, Fogarty. There has to be an intentional thing to try to fight this unconscious bias against women, definitely. That happens also with publications, okay? But we have to think about the internal issues also, because there are issues that have to do with the way we are training women to write grants, the way we are mentoring them, and when I'm talking about enabling environment, I'm talking about how can we make this environment so women can feel more comfortable to write a grant, and also, I mean, if she doesn't get the grant, she shouldn't feel depressed. She should try again, because that's the way it is. So competence and confidence are the two things that we need to really strengthen. And there is a lot that still we need to do, but we need to address that is quite important for women to be part of the research environment, because women are bringing diversity. Now we have innovation that is touching issues that were not touched before, because women are entering. We are seeing new things that had to do with menstrual products, okay, because we care about that issue. Even I have been working with engineers that are thinking about better seat belts for pregnant women. I mean, have you tried the seat belts when you're pregnant? I mean, they don't work, but men may not think about that. So research and the participation of women, I'm working with an engineer, a women engineer, that, I mean, she's so happy to work with me because we're thinking together about having a device that can allow women to take a picture of her own cervix. So it's a self-colposcopy, almost a self-colposcopy. But if you talk with a man gynecologist, he said that's impossible. But I think that's possible. So there are so many things that needs to be done at different levels. We have to fix the numbers. We have to fix the institutions, okay? And we have to fix the knowledge. So there is a lot to do, but there is hope, and I think we have to keep pushing, and I think we're going to be doing better in the next years.
Thank you very much. Quite a number of questions addressed. Thank you very much, Pat. I want the other two panelists to comment on the issue of voice and, of course, overcoming fear and enabling environment. So we have 5 minutes to go. So can I give you 2 minutes each? Comment on any of the issues that came as questions. Thank you.
I'll probably just add to what Patricia said, that there's a lot we can do within our means to actually improve our capacity and mentor and prepare younger people to be able to compete. I'll give you my own example. When I became dean, one of the issues I noted was how people were struggling with being able to write their first grant. And because I had been through it, I thought we need to find somebody who can give us very small monies. And we started internal competitive grants within our own school, coupled with workshops to mentor people on how to write good grants. So we did that, then we advertised them, and we actually mimicked the criteria for NIH and the layout. And so they were able to compete. They started writing grants, which we issued. Last year was the first. This year we've issued others. And some of the people that got these grants felt so excited and more confident that they can actually win one, and they're already now writing several other grants. We didn't have to look for external funding. They were very small. And we only got support from one, institution, a private institution external to the school, and we've been able to do really a good job. But also the lobbying and advocacy, for the first time ever, we received research funding from our government, $8 million this year. And we've been able to, in the past 2 weeks, 200 people received grants through that. So it is an opportunity. Start training, mentoring, let's lobby our governments, other partners that can support us. We can refine our skills, we can compete better for the bigger grants if we can start internally. So in addition to dealing with the issues, we can start with the resources that we have, and we can grow good programs. The other issues around the mentorship programs and how you can work with overcoming fear. I think really the practice, I think that came from the last question, like for example, some of the small grants that we've had, but also having mentors when you're responding to these grants. I wrote my first grant when I had never tried this out, but I did it and I had someone that was willing to support me and hold my hand, and we were able to get that grant funded. And from that, it gave me a lot of confidence that I can actually step out and be able to do this. Find a mentor. Some people are too busy to help, but there's always somebody. And at institutional levels, for us that are in charge, I think we need programs that can be able to have mentorship programs, whether it's informal or formal, so that we can make these mechanisms easier for the young people. I think that is really what I had to add. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm happy to talk about the issue of how to work with marginalized populations, because I've done this for more than 10 years, working with marginalized populations. We can be able to talk through that.
Thank you. It's not good to be the last one, the last speaker, because the previous speakers will take the time, but I will go very, very quickly. I want to tell you about the academies of sciences in Africa. Now, most of the African countries, they have academies of sciences, and their responsibility is to support research and development through research, and they can get grants from international agencies. Most of the academies, they have established academies for young scientists, and they are also networks for support of research and bringing in networks, good researchers from academic institutions, from different organizations, so that they can network and work together. Sometimes, say, if there is a call for a grant from one of the funding agencies, if you get 200 applications from one country, they will never fund those grants completely. But if you get 5 or 6 good ones, they will get funded. So try to network and know who is applying for which source of money. And try to have a mentor within your network, and try to be members with the young academies of sciences. Whether you are in a university, in a ministry, or any source, the young academies, they are getting a lot of sponsorship and grants and so on through their networking together. And discuss your research, your proposal with the group. Grants that are, when you apply for them as a single investigator, usually they are not considered to be very strong grants. But if you have collaborators with you, people working with you on that grant, you will get funded you will have a better chance to get funded. So go for the academies, go for networking, go for those, and of course there is an organization of women in science. They also have calls for grants to be sponsored. They are under TWAS in Trieste, and they are sponsoring women for scholarships, for grants, and so on. So network together, don't work on your own. If you have a network, that will be a stronger group to apply for funds from any source that you would look for. Thank you. Time is up.
What more can be said? I think the panelist was excellent, because they've shared with us their lived experiences. It's not what they read in papers, but what they have done. And I think let's give them a round of applause. I'm so inspired. And I think the questions that came from the floor, very interesting questions, important questions. We can't exhaust everything now, but I do think that we've had a very good time. I do think that in future conferences, we need more time for a session like this one, because at the end of the day, it's solutions we are looking for. What can we do? And also making sure that the research we do does not only help us get this academic progression, but research that can influence policy in our countries, influence practice, and of course, improve people's lives. Thank you very much for being a very good audience.
Thank you very much. Thank you to our panelists, moderator, and our audience for your active participation. This is really the interesting topic, and we hope that you will continue this through discussion during your lunch break. And the lunch break will be up to 2 p.m. Right at 2 p.m. there will be another session. Please check your agenda for the next session. There is also another announcement. The Homeway concert is going to have She Matters concert this evening after we finish the sessions. So it is a free concert, and the transportation will be provided at the end of the session. You all are invited to attend this concert, and it will be at the Camp Kigali. Thank you very much. Enjoy your lunch.